When you think of Pink Floyd, the word failure doesn't usually come to mind. This is the band that gave us The Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and The Wall, albums that redefined what rock music could be. But even the greatest artists have moments when inspiration falters, when the music just doesn't flow. For David Gilmour, that low point came in 1987, with a momentary lapse of reason. An album born out of legal battles, ego wars, and creative exhaustion. One he would later describe as a record that floundered under the weight of its own expectations. By the mid-1980s, Pink Floyd was no longer the band that once dazzled the world with sonic experimentation and emotional depth. Roger Waters had left, convinced that The Wall and the final cut were the logical end of their story. Waters believed Pink Floyd was done, that without his vision, the band had no reason to continue. But David Gilmour disagreed. He felt that Pink Floyd belonged not to one man, but to the music itself, and to the millions who still wanted to hear it. So he gathered drummer Nick Mason, a handful of session musicians, and began crafting what would become a momentary lapse of reason. The album's creation, however, was anything but smooth. Without Waters, there was no clear concept, no central message, and no cohesive theme. Gilmour later admitted that much of it felt like a desperate attempt to sound like Pink Floyd, rather than be Pink Floyd. Released in September 1987, A Momentary Lapse of Reason was both a comeback and a gamble. From the start, it was clear the album leaned heavily on Gilmour's guitar and production instincts. Tracks like Learning to Fly, On the Turning Away, and Sorrow showcased his melodic brilliance, soaring solos, lush atmospheres, and that unmistakable Floydian melancholy. But beneath the surface, something was missing. The tension, the contrast between Waters' cynicism and Gilmour's romanticism, the very balance that had defined Pink Floyd, was gone. What remained was an album that sounded grand, but hollow. Gilmour himself would later describe it as a transitional work, one made under intense pressure, both legal and emotional. He confessed, "It was me trying to keep the thing alive, and in doing so, I think we lost a bit of what made us special." Even the album's title, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, felt ironic in hindsight, as if Gilmour had unknowingly summarized his own doubts. While Gilmour and Mason were building the new album, Roger Waters was waging a legal battle to stop them. He claimed the name Pink Floyd belonged to him, that continuing without him was nothing short of theft. The court eventually ruled in Gilmour's favor, allowing the band to keep the name. But the victory came at a price. The album had to prove that Pink Floyd could still exist, not just as a name, but as a force. In the rush to meet deadlines, producers were brought in, co-writers hired, and studio musicians filled in for missing members. Rick Wright, once an essential part of the band's sound, was technically not even a full member during recording. He was hired as a session player, for his own band. Looking back, Gilmour would later say that the process didn't feel like a band at all. It was Pink Floyd in name, but not in spirit. Despite its troubled birth, A Momentary Lapse of Reason found commercial success. The singles performed well, the tour was massive, and fans, hungry for anything Floyd-related, embraced it. For many listeners, songs like Learning to Fly captured the spirit of hope and renewal. But to Gilmour, the praise felt hollow. He knew what it took to make that record. Endless studio hours, rewriting, and overproduction just to keep the illusion alive. In one interview years later, he said bluntly, "It was a strange time. We were trying to find our feet again, but really, it was just me, struggling to make it sound like the band." Even Nick Mason described the sessions as disjointed, admitting that for much of the album, he didn't even play the drums. Session players did. It was survival, not inspiration. Decades later, when Gilmour revisited A Momentary Lapse of Reason for its 2019 remix, he admitted that parts of it had always bothered him. He said the album was too polished, too 1980s, and lacked the organic feel of Wish You Were Here or Animals. In the remix, he brought back Rick Wright's keyboard parts, re-recorded drum sections with Mason, and stripped away some of the artificial production. The result was more cohesive, more human, closer to what Pink Floyd might have sounded like if they'd been whole again. But even then, Gilmour remained critical of the original. In his words, "It floundered. I was trying too hard to keep something alive that maybe needed rest." That word, floundered, summed up the unease of that era, a band caught between legacy and loss. For all its flaws, a momentary lapse of reason still holds a strange power. It represents resilience, the will to carry on even when the heart of the band is gone. It's not the dark side of the moon, it's not the wall, but it's the sound of a musician refusing to give up his identity. David Gilmour might wish to forget the turmoil that surrounded it, but in many ways, that struggle became part of Pink Floyd's myth. Because sometimes greatness isn't about perfection, it's about surviving the chaos that comes after it.